reaction to that, first of all. I mean, in the end, it rounded off quite a good, I think quite a good round of matches in the FA Cup. We had 2-2 after full time and extra time, and then the shootout to finish, first to tie in this round that went to a shootout. What did you make of West Ham overall, Miguel?
Well, I suppose the thing with West Ham now is they are actually looking like a mid-table Premier League team. As illustrated by the fact they so put it up to Brentford at the moment, who will be disappointed by that result, but obviously have some other big designs this season. There is a respectability about West Ham again. And yeah, as you say, it fed into what was actually, it was maybe an FA Cup weekend that didn't necessarily excite people that much beforehand. But a lot of the games did produce a lot of drama. Sunday, which was maybe seen as a more muted day, you ended up seeing two big upsets. And today, going to round it off with an all-Premier League game with two clubs who looked like they really wanted to do something in this competition, regardless of issues like team selection or any of the rest of it. And yeah, it did produce a proper back-and-forth game. And then the drama of penalties, and something maybe we can discuss a little bit, which is another Panenka stop, something that I think is beginning to become actually a little bit of a trend in the game.
It is. And it begs the question, is the Panenka ever the right choice for a penalty? Because the one that really stands out to me, Miguel, recently, I mean, well, yeah, when it scored it is, of course, but Brahim Diaz in the Africa Cup of Nations final, especially after that, what was it, like 17-minute stoppage? When obviously the Morocco players went off the pitch, came back on, etc. What did you make of that? Dango Ouattara with Brentford's second penalty early on in the shootout, going for the Panenka, and Alfonso Areola just goes, thanks very much.
But that's it.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Riyadh, that was to you. Sorry, yes, Riyadh. You come in.
Look, I feel passionate about this, so I'm going to have to talk over Miguel. I think the day that players stop trying a Panenka is the day football truly dies. I can tolerate grappling in the box, I can tolerate VAR, but when Panenkas go from the game, then we've got a crisis for the soul. Look, it was a fairly dismal Panenka. We should add, but no, I don't. Look, there's probably a time and a place for them, and I'd argue that the Africa Cup of Nations final, I'd argue that an FA Cup.
But surely never in a shootout. I mean, unless you're 3-0 up and you fancy you can just, let one go. But if it's a decisive penalty, Sean, if you're winning 3-0 in a game and you've got a penalty towards the end of the game, then fine, try a penalty. It has no real consequence. Miguel, what's your take?
But on that, though, to be fair, there's a famous example, Euro 2012, the quarter-final, England against Italy, when I suppose you would say Panenkas were actually less common at that point. But Pirlo trying one actually changed, and scoring actually changed the entire psychology of that shootout, which look maybe some after-the-fact commenting, but I do believe that was true. You could feel it. I think an issue is that Panenkas aren't really, as great as they are, and I do agree with Riyadh there, you love to see them, and you love the impotence of them, or the impudence, sorry. But they've now become very commonplace to the point that obviously goalkeepers are now guessing, there's probably a 1 in 5 chance a certain profile of attacker, maybe the more kind of creative attackers, are going to try a Panenka. I mean, you're unlikely to see a centre-half try one, let's be fair. Maybe some centre-halves. But so goalkeepers are now guessing that, or not guessing, but they're wondering, rather than take a decision, that it's actually just as well to stay in your line because there's a decent chance they will try it. So it's like this kind of constant game of second guessing between kickers and then goalkeepers is kind of coming back around a little bit.
I wonder which is the sillier way to miss a penalty. No look, or is it Panenka? Briefly on you both. Would you rather miss Panenka or would you rather miss no look penalty? Which, both of you. Miguel, you first.
I'd rather miss Panenka.
What about you, Ria? You'd rather miss Panenka just trying to go for the cheeky or the no look? Because it's just got a bit of arrogance about it, the no look, doesn't it?
Yeah, Panenka's all ego, and there's something beautiful about that. I can't advocate enough for people continuing to try this utterly foolish move of taking a penalty.
Oh, poor Dango Ouattara. He doesn't want to hear this. Riyadh. Let's have a look at the FA Cup quarter-final draw, which was made a bit earlier on Monday evening. So the big tie, in terms of glamour tie, big Premier League teams, is Manchester City at home to Liverpool. We've got to talk about Port Vale. And after their heroics are beating Sunderland on a bobbly pitch at Vale Park, having beaten Bristol City only in the week in a rescheduled fourth-round tie, they get what they wanted, Miguel, and that is a trip to Stamford Bridge to take on Chelsea. That really is the romance of the FA Cup, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, this actually is what it's about. As you say, you get an upset win, you get it in front of your fans, and then you get that big trip, which is the FA Cup is supposed to be about. And I think there's for me, actually, I was working as a journalist, there's an extra depth to the story because the manager, John Brady, I actually interviewed him in October when he was out of work, and he did have a history of and a background of overperformance with Northampton Town, getting them promoted. And he spoke a lot about the psychology required to achieve that. And I think it's something we've seen with Port Vale, who've obviously had, prior to this, a difficult season. Certainly was one of the reasons that he came in mid-season. And yeah, this is, I think, a testament to his approach and a credit to the club. And it is a vintage FA Cup story in that way, that the competition, I'm not going to say it needed, it always needs it. This is what you want out of it. You want these stories and the potential for something to happen. Especially in the latter rounds.
When we look at this, I mean, OK, going to form, Chelsea should get through, Arsenal should get through, but then you've got Manchester City versus Liverpool, and you've got West Ham against Leeds. I just want to talk about this final tie, before I ask you about who's favourite. The final tie here, what does this mean to these two teams involved? Not just because they don't always find themselves in these positions, but because of where they are in the Premier League table. Yes, West Ham have made up some ground, but they're still in that relegation zone, and Leeds are, a few points above it. So, what pressure is there on that tie, Riyadh, at the London Stadium?
I'm affected by this because I love the FA Cup, and you never want to say one of those things that quote unquote devalues the FA Cup, but at the same time, it's possibly the last thing either of these clubs need. I think you can make the argument both ways, can't you? For West Ham tonight, winning breeds winning. Winning breeds confidence. Confidence breeds momentum. So they need that at the moment. They're hitting a good run. I can't imagine, Tottenham and Forest are looking over their shoulders at them. But for both Leeds and for West Ham, they're in a pretty dire situation in the league. Do they need the extra workload? Okay, that's a very dull, unromantic way to look at it. And as I say, being in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, that is going to lift the mood around the place. But what happens if there is an injury? I noticed Somerville picking up a knock towards the end of the game tonight. I think we already saw with Nuno. Yeah. He's made 7 changes for the game tonight. How much of a priority is the FA Cup for West Ham right now? It's going to be these are the little things which are going to add up. Are they going to win? Look, they're one of the last 8. Maybe they've got a chance, but they probably won't. And again, incredibly unromantic thing to say, but the Premier League is right there. We know the costs of relegation. That's what's at stake here. So I think there's possibly going to be a mixed feeling within the clubs as well. So that is something that's clearly got to be factored in. But it's the reality of modern day football, isn't it, Riyadh? We're talking about Tottenham Hotspur prioritising Premier League survival over Champions League progress, and West Ham, you would imagine that Nuno Espirito Santo and the board, etc., would say the same, that the Premier League and being in it next season is what matters. Who is favourite right now in terms of this last 8 that we've seen? Miguel, who do you think?
Yeah, I think Leeds, and not just because they're higher in the table.
I mean overall.
Oh, sorry, overall.
Because otherwise that's a bold call.
I mean, Leeds, they have to be thinking about doing a Palace from last season. Yeah. I think it was maybe, despite the glory of the Port Vale story, and also Southampton going through, maybe one of the slight tinges with both of those games, because I actually thought both Fulham and Sunderland had maybe a chance of doing something different, especially with the way, for the big squads or the big clubs, the wealthier clubs, the calendar is now so congested, not least for City and Arsenal, who are at present going for everything. And I think that very fact could influence how this Champions League goes. Look, just because of that draw, you are probably looking at Arsenal on maybe who comes out of the City-Liverpool game. But I think there's going to be, just with the way the season is going, with the way, especially those 3 kind of the old quote-unquote Big 6 clubs that are still in the Champions League, they might have bigger aspirations, which might allow an opening in the competition. Yeah, so as I say, Arsenal probably just about the favourites, but I think there's going to be twists in this.
OK, and briefly, Riyadh, who is your favourite?
Arsenal, but I'm looking at Chelsea there, and with no disrespect to Port Vale, Chelsea have probably got a foot in the semi-finals already, and they've got less of a workload. But I look at that Arsenal squad, and they can rotate their way rotate their way quite comfortably through games. So, I think it'd be foolish to say anything other than Arsenal right now.
Yeah. Well, from Arsenal to Tottenham, we've sort of mentioned this a little bit before. Igor Tudor, as I say, wanting more to stay up in the Premier League than to progress in the Champions League. And in the eye, as we begin to get our first few papers here on Back Pages tonight, tempo shift. Tudor tells Spurs to forget relegation fears and enjoy Atletico tie. Do you think they can enjoy the tie against Diego Simeone's side? It always feels like it's going to be a bit of a battle. What do you think, Miguel?
In normal circumstances, well, basically, so for Spurs, anything that didn't involve the abnormality of such a wealthy club be fearing relegation, I would say, even if it was a bad season, as we saw with the Europa League last year, they can enjoy this. I think where they are at the moment and with how fixated the entire club is on the idea of survival, this is actually one of those unwelcome distractions rather than welcome distractions, especially given the side they're playing, and especially given like a lot of the kind of murmurs coming out of the club, that Tudor has caused a bit too much of a shock. It's almost, to some degree, it does feel like the last thing the team leads right now, that they do actually need to get in gear for the league. Look, they might well prove me wrong. Maybe we'll see like what we saw when I went to that game when Spurs played Dortmund in the group stage. And to be honest, I went to the game thinking this could be Thomas Frank's last game. Instead, Spurs actually produced a brilliant performance where they, to be honest, eviscerated Dortmund, which is remarkable to think now. Frank went a few weeks later, and now we have this situation. Yeah, but it could end up similar like that. I think Atletico Madrid will just have too much for them. They're in a better place. I think they could end up beating them quite convincingly, and it could create just more complications for Spurs, more negative noise.
The headline in the eye comes from Eddie Howe, who's trying to really stoke up the fire in the bellies of his Newcastle players. Howe rallies side before glamour tie against Barcelona. Take this chance, he may never have it again. Well, obviously it's unlikely they'll get it next season in terms of where they are in the table, but to try and evoke the memory of 1997, Riyadh, and that Faustino Asprilla hat-trick. Do you remember it?
I do remember it very well. I think it's one of those iconic players and one of those iconic moments. But look, Newcastle are in a fairly ropey season. It feels like every step forward's accompanied by at least one in the opposite direction. It's a very good comment piece from Ollie Holt today, talking about Eddie Howe and the slightly shifting relationship he's got with elements of the fans up there. People have started to boo him. I think the Brentford game was quite notable for that, and I think Ollie's made the point. This is the best thing that's happened to Newcastle since Sir Bobby Robson. I'd be inclined to agree. I find it unbelievable that out of the problems that they've had at that club, that anyone could turn against Eddie Howe for what he's done. It's Champions League or bust for Newcastle. We've seen what's happened in their league season. That's going absolutely nowhere. They're beneath Sunderland in the table. I think they're 12th at the moment, so they need something. Does that come against the best team in La Liga? I'm not convinced, but we've seen with Newcastle, we've seen it in the last few weeks, beating Man U with 10 men. They can actually produce these really good performances, but it's almost a flip of the coin at the moment with them. So we don't really know what we're going to see.
Yeah, and of course Barcelona did win at St James's Park in the league phase of the competition as well. So Newcastle have that to think about. OK, thanks for the moment, gents. We've got through plenty. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll look at more of the sports stories in the morning's newspapers, including this in the Telegraph. After England lose against Italy for the first time, they vow to keep on kicking. Yet Steve Borthwick's not going to change his tactics. We're back in a couple of minutes. Our samurai from the Daily Mail. We're going to turn our attention to The Times and a piece written by friend of the show, Martin Ziegler. Abramovich to fight UK over £2.35 billion. Miguel, could you unpack this one for us, please?
Yeah, so this ultimately comes down to it's the money that was paid for Chelsea by the current owners after the forced sale in 2022 from Abramovich's sanctioning from the invasion of Ukraine. And where the dispute ultimately comes from, I mean, look, obviously the UK government doesn't want the money to go to Abramovich. Abramovich himself and his people would say they were the first to raise the idea that this should go to charity or to charitable causes. Although there is, I think, there's a bit of a swirl of kind of PR surrounding this entire story, and there has been since the start. But some of the language used by the Abramovich side, which is that money would go to all victims of the Ukrainian war, I suppose leaves open the possibility, and it is open language, that it doesn't necessarily go to the Ukraine, which the UK government are very insistent on, because ultimately there's a belief that Russia should pay for the devastation caused. And this wording leaves open the possibility that it could go to Russian sources. And I suppose, the nub of all this is Abramovich has been sanctioned for his links to Putin, and specifically the wider funding of the Russian state and the Putin war machine, which is why obviously the resistance is. And look, there's a whole other debate that we could have here, a whole other discussion about how Abramovich's entire 19 years in charge of Chelsea and a whole era of English football could be, recast, reinterpreted. But on this specific story, we could end up with a situation where the UK government actually takes Abramovich to court for a forced confiscation, which his side have said they will fight. Just given everything around this story, it doesn't look like one where the UK government is going to back down.
Yeah, this is really the nub of it, and what the money will be spent on is one of the key elements, because Abramovich's law firm say he remains fully committed to using the money for charitable purposes. The government insists all the money must be spent in Ukraine, according to Martin's piece, but Abramovich wants it to be used to help all victims of the war there. So I guess this one is going to get very complex legally. But thanks, Miguel, for just running us through that. Also in the Times, piece by Paul Hurst, no Rodri ban after ref rant. This was an interesting one, isn't it, Riath? Because Rodri's been fined £80,000, but he's not been banned. This after saying, and the comments here said, it's not just today, it's 2-3 games in a row. The referee has to be neutral, and for me, honestly, it's not fair. This about the referee Rob Jones after the 2-2 draw against Tottenham last month. What's your reaction to this, Riath?
Yeah, look, this is an interesting one. I think when we do hear managers occasionally lean into this and they get punished, clearly they've decided it's not crossed the threshold. He's admitted the charge, but sort of challenged, I suppose, the meaning of his words. I think when I'm going through it, it's like, I know we've won too much and people don't want us to win, but the ref has to be neutral. I mean, to see it in black and white, you could argue he's perhaps a little bit fortunate that it's not been taken as a direct attack on the integrity of the referee, but it's not met the threshold. So he's been given this 80,000 fine instead of a suspension. He's put forward his argument, sort of very detailed written reasons for what he says he meant. He initially argued that he'd been perhaps misinterpreted. Again, I'm looking at it in black and white and seeing that I've seen them given.
Okay, yeah, it's one of those in that bracket. Is he copping out there though, Miguel? What do you think? I mean, do you think it has crossed the threshold? Do you think that you expected at least some sort of ban here?
In the way it was said, in the order of the words, I think it did cross a line. I'm surprised he hasn't been punished. But I suppose if we are speaking about looking at the words in black and white in terms of the direct, literal meaning, he doesn't actively say that anyone hasn't been neutral. He talks about it in a sort of conditional way, which I suppose it might be some of the justification for how he's escaped. But I think, as Riyad says, seeing them given, it does feel borderline. But you can see the logic of the way it was said. Let's just
recap the quote. It's not just today. It's 2-3 games in a row. The referee has to be neutral, and for me, honestly, it's not fair. Now, obviously, I'm not intonating that in exactly the way that Rodri did, but I guess it's the last bit, isn't it? It's the referee has to be neutral, and for me, honestly, it's not fair. I mean, it's just the word is inference, isn't it? Is he inferring that it's not fair because the referee is not being neutral? Is that right? Is that what you're saying, Miguel?
Well, I suppose the argument could be he's specifically saying that, that the referee has to be neutral, which is demand, and it's not fair, which is something separate, which relates to decisions that have gone against him. Look, we can all make our own inferences on this, but in terms of, I suppose, the literal meaning of the language, you can separate it. Look, I'm surprised he hasn't been punished. I think maybe there'll be some aggravation at Arsenal as far as they're thinking about City at all. It could have implications for the title race. But you can see some of the logic, I suppose.
I mean, this is it, isn't it? I mean, just specific players' absence for whether it's injury, whether it is suspension, is so critical right now at both ends of the table. We talked about, West Ham and potentially Crysencio, some of them, whether he's injured or not, what that might do as an impact on Nuno Espirito Santo's side. And if Rodri had been suspended by the FA, but he's not, he's been given a fine instead. Well, look, I think they are, regardless, thanking their lucky stars. OK, a little bit of rugby union for about a minute and a half or so. Back to you, Miguel, on the Telegraph. England vow to keep kicking. This is about their tactics, their box kicking, which just did not work against Italy. And Steve Borthwick has been given a bit of a vote of confidence, although, it's been shocking how bad they've been, isn't it?
Yeah, that's funny. From talking to our rugby correspondent, Harry Latham-Coyle, last week, actually, before I was supposed to come on the show, about the Italy game. And he was saying at the time that Borthwick is safe, there's confidence in his approach, unless there's a defeat to Italy, which, of course, happened. And it happened after Borthwick made more changes than we've ever seen from England from any Six Nations game ever. And now you've got the complete opposite, where he's sticking with this approach, even in a different way, of course, for this game against potentially the most electric team in the competition, outside the Scots, maybe. And yeah, it does feel like one of those situations where almost the manager, and we see it all the time in football, where the manager can kind of almost second, third or fourth guess himself. Look, I'm not any sort of expert on rugby, but looking at it from the outside, it does feel a bit like this. And I'm just reading the comments even from ex-pros like Dawson about this. That does seem to be very much the theme.
I was speaking to Danny Kerr recently, and he said, England could lose to Italy, but then if they do lose to France, and this is in Daniel Schofield's piece, another loss will mean England have lost 4 matches for the first time in Six Nations history. They came into this tournament on a 12-match win streak, and look how quickly things have changed. All right, well, listen, it's been fun, it's been enjoyable, as always, Miguel and Riyadh, thank you very much indeed for your company and your insights. If you missed any of the show, well, there is another chance to see Backpages tonight at hour. It's also available as a podcast, did you know? Just download Backpages wherever you get your pods. You can join us again Tuesday night. Our guests will be World Soccer's Henry Winter and also Nick Miller from The Athletic. And, of course, we'll be bringing you a lot of build-up to the Champions League ties. Tottenham take on Atletico. Is this a welcome distraction or an unwelcome one for Igor Tudor? We'll be hearing from him next.